Well, our art class has gone on many wonderful trips over the years. I think we all agree on that. Today, I'm going to take you on a trip that back in time and space to Los Angeles in 1976 and exhibit the first international exhibit of women artists. And the pictures, most of the pictures came from the book that went with that exhibit. So make believe you're in Los Angeles, maybe warm weather. When I say women artists, what names come to mind, if any?
Cassatt. Mary Cassatt.
Mary Cassatt.
George O'Keeffe.
Yes.
And Cathie Klee.
Good. Yeah. Well, we might have suggested Faith Reingold.
Yes.
You talked about a couple of weeks ago. But if I had asked for men artists, probably there would have been a flood of answers, lots more. Well, last summer when I was trying to decide what subject to have for this year's art class, I went to the Wethersfield Library and looked on the shelves. And I found a couple of books which really intrigued me. One of them, Our Hidden Heritage, 5 Centuries of Women Artists. This was written by Eleanor Tufts, who was at one time a member of the faculty of Southern Connecticut College. Later she went to Texas and taught there. And it was a result of her research that she wrote this book. She became very interested in the artists of the last 5 centuries. The other book, written about the same time in relation to this exhibit, was Women Artists 1550 to 1950. So the two books went very well. And I decided I'm going to talk about women artists. And so here I am. As usual, I pick up a subject that has is a bit too big. But this turned out all right. I really found it very exciting. First, I want to tell you that these are 5 artists that I chose, one from each century, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th, which I will talk about first. And some of their pictures are over here. These are pictures from the exhibit, so that's when you're thinking you're in Los Angeles. So let's go 16th century over here. This is Lavinia Fontana. And shown here is her self-portrait. Notice her formal clothes and beautiful formal lace around her neck. Lavinia Fontana of Bologna, Italy, is the first woman in Europe to have had what might be called a normal, successful artistic career. Born in 1552, she was the daughter of an artist, Prospero Fontana, who was her teacher. Her husband was also an artist, but listen to this. Amazingly, he gave up his own artistic career to care for their family and to paint frames for his wife's pictures. Now, wasn't that pretty remarkable for 16th century?
Yeah.
Lavinia Fontana was a prolific painter with 135 documented works, including individual and group portraits, as well as scenes of religious, historical, and current events. she became well known not only in Italy, but in other countries as well. She was even invited to see the Pope. Now we'll look at this painting. Number 1 in the upper left-hand corner is one of her religious paintings. I don't speak French, but this is Noli me tangere, which means don't touch me. It's a picture of Christ in a gardener's clothing, telling Mary Magdalene that she shouldn't touch him. Over here is the grave, is the tomb, with angels guarding it. And the light up here represents the resurrection. So you really need to know all about that to understand it. A few years before Fontana's death, a portrait medal was cast in her honor. And you may not see this well, so I will pass it around. But I want to read what it tells in the book about the coin. Whereas one side of the coin face presents us with a very respectable and classical Roman matron, the reverse shows the artist inspired and at work. Her hair in a frenzy is perhaps more important for Fontana in view that she had a very prodigious output, 135 documented works and 11 pregnancies before her death in 1614 at the age of 62. Now, when you look at it, when I pass it around, notice what she's wearing is quite different from the self-portrait that she put such fancy clothes on herself. So we'll pass this one around. And we'll move to the 17th century. The upper middle of this chart is Judith Leister of Holland, 1609 to 1660. This beautiful portrait is copied from the cover of Hidden Heritage, and the cover doesn't show all of what she's painting. So over here, it's only part of it, but I'm going to pass this around, which shows the joyful violinist who she's painting. So we'll pass that on with this. She has a smile on her face. She looks like she likes being an artist. She's holding her palette and her brush there. Judith Leister was a Dutch genre artist who lived from 1609 to 1660 and was probably the best known woman artist of the 17th century. She was an exception to the general rule that women artists are usually daughters of artists. One of her teachers was probably Frans Hals, who also lived in Haarlem in Holland, and she had a close friendship with his family. Actually, this was the golden age of painting in Holland, and it began to be more acceptable for women to study artists and to become artists. She developed her skills at an early age, a fact that was recognized by other artists when she was admitted to the Painters Guild, which usually just had men, of her native city, Haarlem, at the age of 24. Leister married another artist, Jan Molenaar, and they both became successful artists. They specialized actually in everyday scenes, both of them. The genre, this was popular in Holland at the time, but they had differences in their styles. I want to show you two of her pictures over here. These two. This is the flute player, and this is the proposition. The flute player at first reminds us of Franz Hals, doesn't it? His type. But there are certain noticeable differences and a freshness of approach. See, there are several musical instruments on the wall, and notice how intent the boy is on his playing. And the folk seem to think that was something new that Franz Hals didn't have. The other, the proposition, has feminist overtones. It shows a man with money in his hand making an indecent proposal to the woman and being firmly refused. Whereas many of the paintings by male artists show women clearly inviting such propositions. Here is one woman firmly refusing it. Now we'll go to 18th century. For the 18th century, I chose a French artist, Marie Boullier. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a self-portrait of her or a portrait of her. But her cover, a painting that she had made was on the cover of this book. So I thought I want to include that. The portrait shows a young artist sitting in a relaxed position, holding her easel and brushes. It was painted when Marie Boullier herself was only about 20 years old, perhaps about the age of the young artist in this portrait. Not much is known about Marie Boullier. We do know that she was born in Paris, and her father was a tailor, not an artist. She seems to have specialized in portraits, and her style, as shown in this portrait of Adelaide Bernard, showed a warm sympathy for her subject. There are about 40 recorded paintings, some of which were in salon exhibits. However, only 10 are known to exist today. Now we'll move to the 19th century. For an example of the 19th century artist, let's move to Sarah Peel, an American who lived 1800 to 1885. She was, you can see her in this portrait. She was the daughter of James Peel, a miniaturist, and a niece of the more famous portraitist, Charles Wilson Peel. Sarah Peel painted portraits of prominent people in Baltimore and St. Louis, and also in Washington, where she was chosen to paint a portrait of Lafayette. Excuse me, not Lafayette. Senator Thomas Hart Benton. Somebody else did one of Lafayette. So you'll see that she painted Senator Thomas Hart Benton, who is actually the grand uncle of the painter of the same name. We know the painter's name more than we do the senator's, but you can see her type of work there. Her work was very much in demand. She was the first woman in America to support herself entirely for a long life by the profession of painting. 20th century. This is a self-portrait in bronze of Cathie Klee of Germany, an expressionist who lived from 1867 to 1945. This is a very unusual portrait, and it shows her pain and suffering. She really felt for all the social problems of Germany, which is also shown in her etchings. The two prints of her work over here you'll have to come up afterwards to see these more closely. The upper one is called Storming of the Owner's House, and the other one is Unemployment. Her concern for the unemployed and the impoverished, as well as the ravages of 2 world wars, are the subjects of most of her etchings. And according to my book, Cathie Klee was one of the finest and best known graphic artists of her day, even though she was a woman. Now we'll go to the exhibit over here. Well, these are all pictures from that 1976 International Exhibit of Women's Art in Los Angeles. We'll look at the ones here. We've already seen those, so we'll be looking at these down here. This is a basket of apricots. Still life was a very popular subject of artists, both men and women. This basket of apricots, does that help you see better? This basket of apricots by Louise Moylan is a very good example of the use of fruits in still life. The colors are truly glorious, aren't they? And the fruits look good enough to eat. Louise Moylan was one of the finest still life painters of the first half of the 17th century in France. Her father and her stepfather were both artists, so presumably she received training and encouragement from them. As probably happened with many women artists over the years, most of the painting was early in life, before marriage. One of her pictures this was another artist. Historical paintings were very popular by men artists and women. Also, I'm showing you that women do some of the same subjects that men do. This is Portia Wounding Her Thigh, and it's by Elisabetta Serrana. I have to tell you the story about this. This illustrates an incident in Plutarch's The Life of Brutus. At the time Brutus was plotting Caesar's murder, Portia sensed that her husband Brutus was troubled about something, and she wished he would share those troubles with her. In order to test and prove her strength and courage, even as a woman, she slashed her leg with a knife. Brutus rushed to her side and showed great concern for her. Now I'll read the speech Portia made to Brutus. Brutus, I am Cato's daughter, not merely a concubine to share thy bed and board, but to be a partner in thy troubles. Thou indeed art faultless as a husband, but how can I serve thee any grateful service if I am to share neither thy secret sufferings nor thy anxiety that craves a confidant. I know that woman's nature is thought too weak to endure a secret, but good rearing and good companionship go far towards strengthening the character, and is my happy lot to be the daughter of Cato and the wife of Brutus. Before this, I put less confidence in these advantages, but now I know I am superior to pain. She then revealed her wound and explained her personal trial of courage. Brutus was suitably impressed, and after taking care of Portia's wound, did confide in her the plot to kill Caesar. Elisabetta Serrani's selection of this story from ancient history that has its point in the courage and heroism of women may be an example of early feminism. The theme of the painting, Portia wounding her thigh, certainly made it fit in well with the California exhibit of women artists in the 1970s. With her father as her teacher, 17th century Elisabetta Serrani became a prolific young artist, painting almost 200 works of art before her death of possible poisoning at 27. She was considered an artistic genius and became a cultural heroine during her life. Now we'll move to number 6. Still life with flowers and plums. Moving into the 18th century, here is an example of a still life. This one by Dutch artist Rachel Roesch, daughter of distinguished parents in fields of science and art. Typical of her work is this painting, Still Life with Flowers and Plums. It includes fruit and insects, along with the flowers in a graceful and colorful design. And there are scientifically drawn insects tucked in. Rachel Roesch married another artist, and even though they had a large family, 10 children, she continued painting. She achieved international reputation in her lifetime for her flower paintings, and also suffered no visible decline in her reputation after her death. Now the number 7, top middle. The Cellar of Toussaint is a painting of a woman selling tea. It's a genre picture of high artistic quality by Francoise de Park, an 18th century French artist. Since paintings of common people were not yet popular in France, the artist probably was influenced in choosing genre by the example of the Dutch in the previous century. Little is known about Francoise de Park. Daughter of a French sculptor, she lived in Marseille, France, with some time in Paris and London. Few of her paintings are now known, but we do know she was honored in her lifetime by being chosen a member of the Academy in Versailles, which had been mostly men. Now the top right, number 8. Here is a sample of a portrait. It is a painting of Varvara Ivanova Narishkina, a Polish woman who married a Russian prince. The French artist Elizabeth V Lebrun, born in 1755, chose a Roman classically inspired costume, a perfect foil for her sitter's natural beauty. Even when her sitters were not natural beauties, Elizabeth V Lebrun tended to make them quite perfect. No wonder she was a popular portrait artist. Elizabeth V Lebrun was daughter of a portrait artist. She was given lessons by other artists too, and before she was 15, she was earning enough to support her widowed mother and brother. She became an extremely popular, successful portrait artist even before she was 20, and was much in demand by Parisian aristocracy, including Marie Antoinette and many aristocrats in all the other European countries. She was an artist of extraordinary stamina and speed, producing about 800 portraits in her life. She was honored to be chosen a member of the Académie Royale. Now we'll move to the lower left, number 9, the white soup bowl. The white soup bowl was one of the masterpieces of Anne Valère-Coster, a French 18th century artist who specialized in still life. The book notes that the white soup bowl is actually one of the still life masterpieces of all time. Its simplicity of colors, white and brown, and of subject and design appeals to all. There have been many prints of this made. She is widely acknowledged to be one of the outstanding still life painters of 18th century. Unfortunately, when she tried to expand to painting portraits, she was faced with prejudice about what subjects were suitable for women artists. Others recommended to her that she stick to still life, and they gave the prejudicial opinion that the fair sex lacks certain resources, without which, in those other categories that require more talent, one will never acquire immortality. Now move to number 10 in the lower right. Marie Eleanor Godfred, a French artist who lived from 1778 to 1849, painted this group portrait, the Sons of Marshal Nye. These boys were evidently from a rich family, but instead of the customary formal portrait, they are painted in more lively poses. The artist was born into a family of artists and restorers, and at only 17, she taught drawing at a girls' boarding school. Eventually, she studied with a portrait artist and became an expert at painting women and children. Now we move to the lower left, number 11, for an example of landscape. This moves us into the 19th century with the French artist Rosa Bonner. Gathering for the Hunt is typical of her outdoor landscapes, showing her concern and proficiency in the French countryside and painting animals. She had her start in painting through her father, who was a landscape painter and a drawing master in Bordeaux, France. She spent hours drawing animals and studying them, as well as even dissecting animal parts. Rosa Bonner was a very independent person. She wore masculine clothes, which she found more practical and comfortable, and an emancipation from conventional female modes of behavior. Rosa Bonner was the first woman artist to achieve the Cross of the French Legion of honor. She received awards from other countries too, and she was particularly esteemed in England and America, where there were exhibits of her work and people purchased her engravings. Now, number 12, lower right. Lady Elizabeth Butler was an extremely successful 19th century British painter of military subjects. One example is this, titled Quatre Bras, a form of battle with soldiers lined up 4 deep in a square to be ready to shoot in all directions. She carefully researched the clothing, the weapons, and other military details, and in this case, set up actors in the scene. As in this painting, she tended to have the men posed ready for battle, but not the actual battle scene. Butler studied painting in Florence and Rome, as well as England. Her technical expertise, careful details, and clever compositions influenced other British military painters. Now we move to number 14 and 15, sculpture. Oh, these marble sculptures are Old Indian arrow maker and his daughter, and also bust of Abraham Lincoln and Awake by Edwina Lewis, an African American. Until the 19th century, there were no known women who sculptured in marble. Edwina Lewis was one of those first few. Born in 1843, Edwina Lewis was the daughter of a Native American mother and an African American father. She was the first African American to receive international recognition as a sculptor. Old Indian arrow maker and his daughter is a sample of her sculpture of Native American life. Many other subjects included portraits of famous people, such as Abraham Lincoln, which she made at 29. Among her other subjects were children like this one titled Awake. Her childhood included many visits with her Native American relatives, learning their outdoor ways and traditions. Edwina Lewis received an abolitionist scholarship to go to Oberlin College, which is where one of my women ancestors graduated. Wonder if they knew each other. Her interest in sculpture led her to Rome, where women for the first time were beginning to work as sculptors. She soon became well known, and her marble neoclassical sculpture was much in demand. We'll look at number 16 now, the flamenco singer. Beginning to move to the end of the 19th century and into the 20th, the last chart is evidence that women artists are experimenting with a variety of styles, just as the men artists are. We'll start with the flamenco singer by Sonia Delaney, which is an example of abstract art. The circular rhythms of color make me think of the whirling of a dancer. Notice how the color intensity fades as it moves from the center of activity. Sonia Delaney spent her childhood in Russia, then studied art in Germany, and after marrying French artist Robert Delaunay, she remained in France. Both developed a style involving harmonizing abstract forms, bright color, and motion, as shown in the flamenco singer. Sonia Delaney was versatile in her creativity, also designing clothes, innovative fabric, and other decorative arts. The top middle, number 17, is a summer shower. Edith Taylor was a British artist, one of the 4 artistically talented daughters of an artist, James Taylor. All chose to paint domestic genre scenes, mostly from their own upper-class British Victorian home. A Summer Shower by Edith Taylor is one of these. It's a scene of domestic tranquility where their young people are inside the house awaiting the end of the shower so they can play tennis again. Note that the window in the back, with a view on the rain on an umbrella, helps tell the story. The poses are natural and the colors are light and fresh. We've already discussed Cathie Klee's work, so we'll move here to number 19, the beauty contest. This was painted by the American artist Florence Stetheimer. She was part of an upper-class family whose home in New York attracted the liveliest members of the avant-garde, including artists, writers, and theater people. Some of these well-known people are shown in this painting of the beauty contest. It's dedicated to P.T. Barnum, who is on the right. The artist painted herself in the upper left, near Edward Steichen, the photographer, who is holding his camera. The man with the horse, on the horse, may be Rudolph Valentino. Florence Stetheimer studied in the New York Art Students League and then later with her sisters in Berlin, Stuttgart, and Munich. Thus she had many opportunities to be involved with the artists and new styles of painting. Her career had various aspects. In the 30s, a major career success was her designing of costumes for Gertrude Stein, Virgil Thompson opera, 4 Saints in 3 Acts, which opened at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in 1934. Now to our final picture, the greenhouse, number 20, on the lower right. Gabriele Munter had a style very much related to the Blue Rider group. She specialized in simplified portraits and in landscapes like the greenhouse. Notice the unusual colors and the starkness of forms which are softened by the branches and leaves behind the house. This and others of her paintings were exhibited in the Blue Rider shows. After some studies elsewhere in Germany, Gabriele Munter became bored with traditional academic teaching. In 1902, she joined the avant-garde Phalanx School, which had been organized by Kandinsky. For a number of years, she was a companion of Kandinsky, whose wife had died, and they traveled extensively in Europe, where they were both influenced by post-impressionists and the openly expressed brushwork of the Fauves. Well, that completes our tour of the exhibit, but what are my conclusions? Although there were fewer women artists than men, there were excellent women artists, as we have seen, and their work was on a par with men's. Some even were very well known and admired during their lifetimes. Big question. Why don't we know about them? The answer given by the authors of both my books, written in the 1970s, is that art historians apparently left most of the women out of their art history books, and few were included by teachers in art history classes. I hope that current art history books, as well as art history classes, are becoming more inclusive. I'm sure that the first international exhibit of women artists in Los Angeles in 1978 must have been a prod in the right direction. Actually, I can think of another reason why we don't know about women artists. This was not discussed in either book. Many women artists work quietly in their homes, often for their own pleasure, but they don't have the opportunity or may not wish to exhibit or display their work. They are also part of our hidden heritage. For example, I brought 2 paintings by women in our family. This picture of Monument Valley was made by our daughter-in-law, Linda. Robbins and I had visited Monument Valley several times, and we loved it. And Linda knew this. She did this picture in pastels for Robbins for Christmas that year. A perfect gift and a beautiful work of art. Our daughter-in-law, Linda, wife of Dave. This picture of China is a watercolor by my mother. Perhaps you know that my parents were teachers in China, and I was born there and lived there until I was 4. Naturally, this painting has a special interest for me because of my Chinese background and the insights into China, but it also is special as a work of art. In the course of reading these books, I did realize that there were indeed some women artists. Although there were some women artists, there obviously were fewer in number than the men artists. And there are reasons for this. A major one was that in earlier years, there were no art classes for women. As a result, the women artists were chiefly limited to those who had artist fathers, who taught and encouraged them. Even when in the 18th and 19th centuries, art education became available to women, the teaching was inferior. Also, the lessons were segregated because women were not permitted to see male or nude models that were a usual part of the men's classes. Another major drawback was that women were often preoccupied with responsibility for home and large families. They really didn't have time to pursue their careers. Also, until recent years, public opinion was that women should be homemakers and not have careers outside the home. In spite of all these drawbacks, if a woman managed to become an artist, she was advised to limit herself to certain kinds of art suitable for feminine skills. For example, dainty work such as miniatures and flowers, or portraits of women and children. Actually, when you look at these paintings by women, you realize women can paint all subjects with great skill. It's my guess if you were to enter a room of paintings by unknown artists, you probably could not distinguish which were painted by men and which by women. Fortunately, gradually, barriers have been breaking down. In the 17th century, Holland became the first country to have art education for women, followed soon by other European countries. By the 18th century, it was no longer exceptional for women to earn a living as an artist, and many women began to teach art as well. More exhibits were open to them, and during the 19th and 20th century, most of the remaining barriers were broken down, and women were assuming more of their rightful prominence. I'll end with a quote from Eleanor Tufts, the author of Our Hidden Heritage, 5 Centuries of Women. Women should be considered intrinsically as artists rather than as artistic phenomena. I think I'll repeat that. Women should be considered as artists rather than as artistic phenomena.